What happens when a CEO boards a plane and gets treated like a criminal? Harold Washington stood at the gate in Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, 70 years old, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that had been pressed that morning with care. His first-class boarding pass, Zone 1, Seat 3A, felt substantial in his hand. Not just a piece of paper, but a symbol, decades of work, countless sleepless nights, a career built from nothing into something extraordinary. This wasn't just any flight. This was his retirement victory lap, a speaking engagement at the aviation industry's most prestigious summit, the same industry where he'd started as a junior engineer 45 years ago, facing closed doors and lowered expectations at every turn. Now he was the keynote speaker, the expert, the man they'd invited to share wisdom. His heart carried quiet pride as he walked down the jet bridge. He'd earned this moment, but the stares started before he even reached his seat. Not the casual glances of fellow travelers. Something sharper, colder, more suspicious. Whispers rippled through the first-class cabin like a virus spreading. Something was wrong. Terribly, predictably wrong. Have you ever been judged before anyone in your story? Drop it in the comments right now, because what happens to Harold next will absolutely enrage you. Harold's journey to this moment hadn't been a straight line. It had been a marathon through obstacles most people never see. He'd graduated with honors from Georgia Tech in 1979, one of 3 black students in his engineering program. His classmates had study groups he wasn't invited to, professors who wouldn't meet his eyes, career fairs where recruiters suddenly had no more applications. But Harold had persistence coded into his DNA. His mother cleaned houses to pay for his books. His father worked double shifts at the plant. Failure wasn't an option when so many had sacrificed for his success. He'd started at a small aviation parts manufacturer, the only black engineer in the building. 45 years of proving himself, of having his ideas questioned until a white colleague repeated them, of being mistaken for maintenance staff, of code switching so smoothly it became exhausting background music to his life. But he'd risen, through talent that couldn't be denied, through patents that bore his name, through innovations that saved companies millions. From junior engineer to senior engineer to director to VP to, finally, CEO of his own aviation engineering firm, one of the largest corporate partners for major airlines. This speaking engagement represented the culmination of everything. The Aviation Industry Summit only invited the most respected voices. His session was a keynote, prime slot, main stage, packed audience. They wanted to hear about leadership, innovation, and the future of aviation engineering. Harold had prepared for weeks. His presentation was sharp, insightful, forward-thinking. He'd even indulged in the first-class ticket, something younger Harold would have considered frivolous. But older Harold understood symbolism, understood that sometimes claiming space was a radical act. His suit had been chosen carefully. His shoes shined. His ID and boarding pass checked twice before leaving the hotel. Not paranoia, experience. He knew that excellence didn't always protect you, that credentials didn't always matter, that sometimes all people saw was skin color. He'd hoped, foolishly perhaps, that maybe this time would be different. The jet bridge stretched before him, confidence in his stride, hope in his heart. He should have known better. Seat 3A aisle. Harold found it easily, placed his carry-on in the overhead bin with practiced efficiency, and settled into the leather seat that he'd paid for, earned, deserved. That's when he felt it. The weight of eyes, multiple pairs, boring into him from different angles. A woman 2 rows back whispered to her companion, not quietly enough, "Is he in the right section?" A business executive across the aisle studied Harold with undisguised suspicion, then checked his own boarding pass as if to confirm Harold's presence was the anomaly, not his judgment. Harold opened his tablet, determined to ignore it. He'd face worse. Much worse. This was just discomfort. He could handle discomfort. Then 2 men approached. Mid-30s, athletic builds, polo shirts with tech company logos, confidence radiating from every pore. The kind of confidence that came from never having to prove you belonged anywhere. "Excuse me." The taller one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think you might be in the wrong seat." Harold looked up calmly. I don't believe so, but let me check. He retrieved his boarding pass from his jacket pocket, held it up. 3A, this is 3A. Right, but... The second man glanced at his friend, then back at Harold. Are you sure you're supposed to be in first class? The implication hung in the air, thick and unmistakable. Quite sure. Harold's voice remained level, decades of practice keeping his anger buried deep, as you can see from my boarding pass. Maybe you should double-check with the gate agent. I've checked in. This is my assigned seat. Now if you'll excuse me. The men didn't move. Other passengers watched the exchange like a tennis match, head swiveling, but mouth staying firmly shut. Not one voice rose in Harold's defense. Not one person said, "Leave him alone, he showed you his ticket." The silence of complicity was its own violence. A flight attendant appeared, late 40s, platinum blonde, smile professionally fixed, but her eyes assessed Harold with immediate suspicion. Is there a problem here, sir? Sir. The word was technically polite, but dripped with something else. No problem, Harold said evenly. These gentlemen were just returning to their seats. Sir, can I see your boarding pass? He handed it over. She studied it like an art appraiser examining a potential forgery, turning it over, holding it to the light, comparing it to her tablet. And your ID? Harold produced his driver's license. She scrutinized it with the same suspicious intensity, as if matching a face to a photo required forensic expertise, when that face was black. If you've ever witnessed injustice and stayed silent, this moment is for you. Hit that like button if you're ready to hear how this ends, because it gets worse before it gets better. The flight attendant's professional smile thinned into a tight line. Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me while we sort this out. Sort what out? Harold kept his voice measured, aware that any hint of anger would be weaponized against him. I've shown you my boarding pass and identification. Both match. I'm in my assigned seat. Let's not make a scene. Her voice dropped but hardened. If you could just move to the back while we verify. Verify what exactly? Sir, the word was a weapon now. I need you to comply with crew instructions. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to call security. The cabin had gone silent. Every passenger pretending not to watch while watching intently. Some sympathetic glances flickered his way. But sympathy without action was just another form of abandonment. Harold felt the familiar burn of humiliation. Not new, never less painful. He'd experienced versions of this his entire life. The department store where he was followed. The restaurants where he was seated near the kitchen despite reservations. The luxury car dealership where salespeople assumed he was lost. The country club where members asked to see his guest pass even though his name was on the membership roster. But this hurt differently. He was 70 years old. 70. A lifetime of achievements, credentials, respect earned the hardest way possible. And here he sat, being treated like a criminal for the crime of occupying space, while black. I'm not moving, Harold said quietly. I'm in my correct seat. You're welcome to verify my information, but I will not be relocated based on your assumptions. The attendant's face flushed. She spoke into her radio, words clipped and urgent. We have a non-compliant passenger in 3A, requesting supervisor and security. Non-compliant, as if asking to be treated with basic dignity was defiance. Harold closed his eyes briefly, thought of his mother, who'd cleaned the homes of people who wouldn't let her use the front door. His grandfather, who'd built furniture for families that wouldn't shake his hand. His daughter, a surgeon, who still had patients ask if she was a nurse. Generations of indignity. And here he sat, still fighting the same battle, in a different uniform. He could feel his blood pressure rising, force himself to breathe slowly. Knew that any display of emotion, frustration, anger, even exhaustion, would be used to justify their treatment. He had to be twice as calm to be seen as half as reasonable. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably. A few looked ashamed but said nothing. One older white woman met his eyes with clear sympathy, but her mouth stayed closed. Their silence was its own verdict. Sir, for the last time, the attendant's voice carried to the cabin, loud enough to ensure everyone heard Harold's humiliation. If you cannot follow crew instructions, we will have you escorted from this aircraft. Do you understand? Harold understood perfectly. He understood that his PhD meant nothing here, that his 37 patents were invisible, that his company, his reputation, his lifetime of excellence couldn't protect him from presumption of unworthiness that came with his skin. He understood that in this moment, all they saw was a black man in first class, an anomaly to be corrected, a problem to be solved, a threat to be neutralized. Security was being called. The humiliation was now public spectacle, and Harold sat there, maintaining his dignity while it was systematically stripped from him, knowing that history would repeat itself unless someone, somewhere, chose to see him as human first. A second flight attendant appeared, younger, tablet in hand, confusion on her face as she approached her colleague. "Jennifer, what's the—" She glanced at her screen, then at Harold, then back at the screen. Her eyes widened. Oh no, what?" Jennifer's voice was sharp, defensive. The younger attendant turned the tablet, so her colleague could see. Harold watched Jennifer's face transform, confusion morphing into shock, morphing into horror. This is... Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the silent cabin. "He's not just in the right seat. She pulled out her phone. Harold could see her fingers shaking as she typed his name into Google. The results loaded. Her face went pale. Other passengers, sensing the shift, pulled out their own phones. The cabin filled with the soft glow of screens and the quiet gasps of people discovering what they should have known all along. Harold Washington wasn't some confused passenger who'd wandered into first class by mistake. He was CEO of Washington Aerospace Engineering, board member of 3 major aviation companies, holder of 37 patents in aviation safety systems, keynote speaker for tonight's summit, the very event most of these industry professionals were flying to attend. The information spread like wildfire through the cabin via whispered updates and shared screens. Faces that had watched his humiliation with cool detachment now burned with embarrassment. The 2 men who'd initially challenged him had disappeared into their seats, suddenly very interested in the safety card in their seat pockets. Jennifer backed up, stammering, "Mr. Washington, I'm so sorry. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Harold finished quietly. "I don't think so. I think there's been a very clear understanding. The question is what happens next." Movement at the front of the cabin. The captain emerged from the cockpit, a rarity during boarding. Salt and pepper hair, deep lines around his eyes, a career's worth of experience in his weathered face. He approached Harold's row, removed his cap, and crouched down to eye level. "Mr. Washington." His voice was low, meant for Harold, but audible to those nearby. "I owe you an apology. My crew owes you an apology. This should never have happened." Harold looked at this man who'd come make amends now that credentials had been revealed. "You're right. It shouldn't have. But it did, and we both know why." The captain held his gaze. To his credit, he didn't look away. "Yes, sir, we do." Suddenly, the cabin was full of apologies, offers of complimentary drinks, extra snacks, anything to make this right, now that they knew who Harold was. But Harold understood what they didn't seem to grasp. Their apologies only came after Google told them he mattered. Before that revelation, his humanity wasn't enough. Comment dignity. If you understand why Harold's response to all this matters more than their scrambled apologies. Harold accepted their apologies with quiet nods, but said little else. The flight proceeded in uncomfortable silence. First-class passengers suddenly fascinated by their phones, their books, the clouds outside, anything to avoid his gaze. Jennifer and the other attendant overcompensated, checking on him constantly, offering everything from champagne to warm cookies. Harold accepted nothing, not out of spite, but because anything he took now would feel tainted by guilt rather than given through genuine respect. During the flight, Harold stared out the window and thought, not his first time experiencing this. Far from it. But something about being 70, about being so close to retirement, about having earned every possible credential and still being presumed unworthy, it cut differently. He thought about his prepared speech for the summit. 2 months of work, carefully crafted talking points about innovation, leadership, the future of aerospace engineering. safe topics, professional topics. But now, those words felt insufficient. The plane landed. Harold gathered his belongings with deliberate care. Passengers who watched his humiliation now gave him wide berth, nobody meeting his eyes. A few mumbled, "Excuse me," as they squeezed past, suddenly remembering manners. At the summit venue, Harold checked in, made small talk with organizers, shook hands with colleagues. Several had already heard about the flight incident. News traveled fast in industry circles, especially when it was humiliating for all involved. "Are you going to mention it?" his friend Marcus asked in the green room before Harold's keynote. Harold looked at his prepared remarks on his tablet, then at his reflection in the mirror. 70 years old, carrying 70 years of these moments. How many more would he swallow in silence? "Yes," he said finally, "I think I have to." The ballroom was packed. Nearly 800 aviation professionals, engineers, executives, pilots, industry leaders. They'd come to hear about technical innovations. They were about to get something different. Harold took the stage to warm applause, stood at the podium, surveyed the audience, saw the flight attendant Jennifer in the back, her presence required as airline representative, saw the captain, who'd chosen to attend, saw faces eager for wisdom. "Good evening. I'm Harold Washington, and today I was asked to prove I belonged in my own seat." The room went still, not asked politely, demanded, threatened with removal, treated as a problem to be solved rather than a passenger with valid documentation, and every right to be there. Why? Because I'm a 70-year-old black man sitting in first class, and for some, that remains suspicious. He watched them shift uncomfortably. Good. I wasn't planning to share this. My prepared remarks are about aerospace innovation. But here's what I realized. We can't innovate in an industry where bias determines who belongs, where credentials only matter after Google confirms them, where respect is granted based on job titles rather than humanity. Harold looked directly at Jennifer. She was crying silently. He didn't take pleasure in it, but he didn't look away either. This isn't an isolated incident. Ask any black professional in this room, and there aren't enough of us here, are there? And they'll share similar stories. Being followed in stores despite company credit cards. Having expertise questioned despite advanced degrees. Being mistaken for support staff despite executive titles. An older black woman in the third row nodded, tears streaming down her face. A younger black engineer stood up, started clapping. Others joined. The applause built not in celebration, but in recognition. "I'm 70 years old," Harold continued when the room quieted. "I've earned every credential this industry offers. 37 patents. Companies built. Lives changed. And today, none of that mattered until someone Googled my name. That's not a system working. That's a system revealing its true values." He paused, letting it land. "I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm sharing this because those of us with platforms have an obligation to use them, to name what happens, to demand better, not just for ourselves, but for the young black engineers just starting their careers, for the ones facing these indignities without the cushion of credentials to hide behind." The ballroom was silent, except for occasional sniffles. Dignity shouldn't require defense. Belonging shouldn't need documentation beyond what anyone else provides. Respect isn't something earned through titles. It's a baseline we owe each other as humans. Harold gripped the podium. "I'm retiring soon. Leaving this industry I've given my life to. My hope, my challenge to you, is that you'll do better, that you'll speak up when you see injustice, that you'll examine your own biases, that you'll build an industry where the next black engineer doesn't have to prove their humanity before proving their expertise." He stepped back from the microphone. The standing ovation shook the room, but Harold knew better than to mistake applause for action. Applause was easy. Change was hard. Still, he'd said what needed saying. Not for him, for all the others who couldn't. The video of Harold's speech went viral within hours. Millions of views. Shares across every platform. Major news outlets picked it up. Retired CEO exposes airline discrimination. Read the headlines. The airline issued a carefully worded statement about commitment to diversity and inclusion, ongoing training, and policy reviews. The flight attendants were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The two men who'd initially challenged Harold deleted their social media accounts as the internet identified and excoriated them. But Harold knew the real impact wasn't in punishments or PR statements. It was in the flood of messages he received from other black professionals sharing their own stories. A surgeon who'd been asked to give up his first-class seat to a white passenger because doctors usually fly business class. A law professor repeatedly questioned about how she could afford premium tickets. A tech CEO whose presence in an airport lounge was challenged despite membership card and company logo on his polo shirt. Story after story after story. A pattern undeniable. Harold's grandson called, 14 years old, voice shaking. "Grandpa, why do people do that to you? You're so smart and successful." Harold closed his eyes, wishing he could protect this boy from ever having to ask that question. But protection wasn't possible. Preparation was. Because some people can't see past their assumptions. They've decided what people who look like us can or can't do, can or can't be, can or can't have. Our job isn't to make them comfortable with our existence. It's to exist fully anyway. Weren't you scared? When they threatened to kick you off. Terrified, Harold admitted, but more scared of what happens if we stay silent. If we make ourselves smaller to fit their expectations. Your great-grandmother used to tell me, they're going to be uncomfortable with you no matter what you do. Might as well be uncomfortable while standing tall. 3 weeks after the incident, Harold received an invitation to meet with the airline's executive leadership. They wanted to partner with his firm on a comprehensive bias training program, wanted his input on policy changes, wanted to do better. Harold was skeptical, but showed up. In the boardroom, the same airline's headquarters. He looked around at faces eager to learn, to change, to fix what they'd allowed to fester. "Here's the thing," Harold told them. "You can create all the policies you want, but policies don't change hearts. Training modules don't eliminate bias. What changes things is consequences, accountability, and a commitment to uncomfortable conversations that don't end when they stop trending on Twitter." They nodded, took notes, promised action. Harold hoped they meant it. But hope without follow-through is just another form of erasure. Months later, at his actual retirement party, Harold stood surrounded by colleagues, friends, family. His daughter gave a speech about his legacy. His grandson presented him with an award. World's most patient grandpa who shouldn't have to be. Marcus pulled him aside. "You change things, you know. Really change them. The number of complaints airlines have received since your story. Companies are actually having to address this stuff. One story can't fix a system," Harold said. "No, but it can start the conversation, can give others permission to tell theirs, can make silence a little less comfortable.